Getting used to that. Good.
I just got back from spending a time with a very dear friend, and about halfway through our time together, it became very uncomfortable for both of us due to a reaction on my part to a request for space that I didn't want to recognize. And I've been reviewing sort of the time we spent together, and I acted very selfishly without even recognizing it. And I'd like to know what I can do with selfish behavior when I do not recognize the behavior to be selfish.
Could you state your question again, and if possible, slightly change it?
I recognized selfish behavior in myself after the actions, and that really scares me because it's pretty difficult to deal with selfish behavior when it's not even seen as selfish behavior. And I guess I'm wondering if there's any way to work with that other than just kind of practicing recognition. And it's really difficult for me to recognize my behavior as self-serving in the moment because I'm a very emotional person, and when all of that kicks in, I tend to act without self-reflection.
That was the last thing?
I tend to act without self-reflection.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd like to find a way to work with that in that moment, even without the recognition.
Well, I think, first of all, I think your question is clear. And just generally speaking, one of the most difficult things to do is to recognize our motivation as it transpires. Like, that's really very difficult. And when we recognize it and see that it's not something that we wanted to do, that also is very difficult to recognize. And difficult to do something about. So, in one way, we could say that the most profound thing that you can do in relationship to any mental state as it comes and goes is to just recognize it. So the recognition itself can be the antidote. So often when the recognition comes, and you may or may not have experienced this, but it sounds like you might have, that you see is you see the motivation or the action, and then you have kind of an aversion reaction to it. You don't want it, you don't want to do it. So it's, what makes it difficult is not entirely that we have experiences, like emotional experiences, that we don't appreciate in ourselves. So what makes it difficult is the attachment and the aversion. That's the big piece. So recognizing the action itself as it occurs is very helpful. But then when we pass judgment on ourselves, not so helpful. And the farther we go in that direction of the various ways in which we can chastise ourselves, the more difficult it is to unwind it. So at some point, it becomes almost impossible to unwind it. And at that point, I think the best thing that we can do is, that's the point in which we recognize the attachment and the aversion. And when we recognize the attachment and the aversion, then if our awareness is stable, we can just put the awareness on the attachment or the aversion and just leave it at that. So in recognizing the attachment and the aversion, we actually are right on the edge of some kind of insight, which maybe is even fairly regular. Because to recognize those things as they occur is very difficult. They normally go by. We kind of see them in the proverbial rearview mirror, or we don't recognize them at all. It's helpful to recognize them. In one way, we often say that the great majority of the path is about recognition. And in a really big way, we often say that the high realization is fundamentally recognizing the nature of mind itself. So it doesn't say recognizing and then do this or then do that. It's just the recognition itself is what's key. Any experience that you have, whether you might judge it as positive or negative, in the moment of having the experience, to be able to just relax a little bit and place the awareness on that experience is very helpful. It sets an example for ourselves, and it also can set an example for others. We can't entirely avoid what we would like to avoid, which is the occasional things that we do that harm ourselves and others, hopefully in small ways. But we can avoid some of the spin-offs, some of the things that come with those experiences by developing the ability and the habit, if you will, using that word carefully, that we develop the habit of placing our awareness on our experiences as they occur, relaxing and just letting the experience go by. But we've seen it. So if we can just then let it go and not elaborate it and make it into something else, that's pretty good. What do you think?
What would you say to someone who is very habituated to self-chastisement, to the spinning afterwards, who can spend days, weeks even, on that?
Yeah. Not so good.
Just a hint, it's me.
Yeah. we have a certain cultural appreciation of exactly what you're talking about. And even in some circles, that appreciation goes to the level of there's something wrong with you if you don't feel really bad about it. But the antidote to the issue that we're talking about is not embedded in the actual experience of this judging ourselves for something we've done, whatever it is. It's really embedded in the lack of recognition. We don't recognize it. Having not recognized it, it's kind of like a puddle of water that you step in. You know, if you look carefully, if for just a moment, probably tomorrow you won't step in that puddle of water. But if you don't see what it is, you're almost sure tomorrow to be condemned to step in the puddle of water again.
Yeah.
So this is, in a certain way, the same thing. Like a little story maybe is helpful. When I'm reminded it partly because of Bill talking about how we were, going to look at the Mahamudra program. That when Bokar Rinpoche originally set up that program, and he announced the practices that people would do in order to continue and benefit from that program. He asked everyone to do a certain number of repetitions of certain practices, which were, in a sense, not particularly difficult to do, but the number of them that was expected was difficult. And so each year then, as part of that program, you were meant to do a certain number of these practices. And in the first summer following the India trip and Bokar Rinpoche's instructions, about which everyone was excited to get instructions from him and all, and so everybody marches out with the full intention of doing these practices. And then in the summer, not very many of those people came to the summer class of it. And when we asked why, when they'd come and they'd say, "I almost didn't come." And in some cases, so we asked them, like, "So how many of these recitations did you do?" And they were supposed to do something like 10,000. And some of the people who said, "I almost didn't come, and I feel like I'm not worthy of being here for this," and then you find out that actually they did like 9,000 of the 10,000, or even more than that. And yet they fundamentally condemned themselves to not participating in the program because they hadn't made the full commitment. When Bokar Rinpoche heard of this, he wept. And immediately decided we needed to change something so that would not be the outcome, since that wasn't the intended outcome. Not only was it not the intended outcome, it was not helpful for people to feel like they were not worthy of being in the program. And so there were all of these cascading cultural interfaces, really. And little by little, things changed. And so that it was possible to accommodate certain things individually and collectively. The issue that you raise is so common, it's so regular. No one gets through this life feeling like I conducted my life in a way which was utterly without harm, and the principle of ahimsa. It's like, it doesn't happen. It's a really rare person who would say, I had a life which was utterly absent of harm to others. And most of us would say, if you think you did that, you probably didn't look very close. So it's not, we find ways to condemn ourselves. We actually don't need a judge. We are the judge, we're the actor, and we are the jailer, the whole thing. So recognizing that mechanism is actually just incredibly helpful. When the Tibetans didn't accomplish the total number that they'd committed to, there was a kind of a wonderful lesson came about. So if they committed to 10,000, let's say, and they did only 5,000, the Westerner felt like they had utterly failed. Not in every case, but generally speaking, they felt like they'd utterly failed. The Tibetans felt like they had completely succeeded. And when asked, how come you feel so good about having only gone halfway? The answer was, if I hadn't made the commitment, I never would have done that many. So it's actually funny, but in another way, it's not funny. It is something to laugh at, but only because the difference here was not intention, ability, or anything other than our own expectation placed upon ourselves, and then failing to meet the demands that we set for ourselves, even though it was at the suggestion of the great Lama. Still, because we beat ourselves up, he wept and altered the program to some degree. But I still think it actually probably needs even more altering, because we're still having that problem to some degree. And what you're raising is really just kind of in that genre. You know, you wish that you could benefit others more than we can. We wish that we would never witness in any way at all that we would hurt another person in any way. But that's not the way things work, generally speaking. So the first person to forgive is ourselves. The first person to generate an act of kindness for is ourselves. And we could say, if we can't generate kindness and forgiveness for ourselves, just exactly how big of a chance do we think we have of doing it for someone else? So it's critical to be able to generate kindness and forgiveness for yourself and continue, not to give up.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
I want to add just one little bit of encouragement. The process that you went through in terms of actually interacting with your friend is you've discovered that there's something that you can actually do. And it's not easy to do these things with our friends and cohorts and colleagues. But it is actually possible to gradually find those kind of connections, be able to nurture the side of the connections where we can get that kind of feedback. And if people really feel like there is a way that they can gently offer that, and that we're actually willing to hear it, then things can evolve from there. So I think what you did is you in a certain way you've answered your own question, and the success in that, in being able to see that there's something that might be possible to do, is a very positive thing. So.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, am I close enough? Thank you, Tara. A few weeks ago, Bob Schwartz was here visiting when we had our big opening, and he had a big stack of books, which he gave some away. And the book, he gave me one, it was called Act from Choice by Robert Goldman. And a subtitle of that could be, be the person you intend to be, or you have an intention of being a certain kind of person, and how to become that person. And the big the man who wrote it is a Buddhist, but he's also a psychologist. And his main premise is that we often act from habitual reaction to things without really stopping to be aware. So the habitual action comes through and we act on it. And if we're really aware, it's what everything Michael's already said. But this whole book is about that particular stopping your old train and don't let it run through, and be aware and be conscious and do what you really want to do. But the trick is to catch that habitual reaction before it becomes action itself. And I think that's what you're talking about. So you might have a look at that book. I think it could be very helpful.
Thanks, Sanjay.
So along these same lines, I'm aware that in my work, I work from a part of myself that is compassionate toward other people. And I find that to be pretty easy. But I'm also aware increasingly that there's this other part of me that has absolutely no compassion for me. And that it's a barrier in my work, it's a barrier in my practice. And so I'm wondering, is noticing that an antidote for that?
Is noticing it what?
Is noticing it the antidote? Is noticing that the antidote? And relatedly, when we think about taking the Bodhisattva vow, how can I not take a Bodhisattva vow with a sense of martyrdom? You know?
How can you not take it with a sense
Yeah, like I'm going to
martyrdom?
sacrifice myself in some way because I don't really matter, you know, for the sake of all, which is just old, you know, it's Christian stuff and it's old stuff, but I'm aware that that's a possibility for me.
What's the possibility?
That I'd go into a bodhisattva vow and say, I'll throw myself away for the sake of others, no problem. And I don't think that that's correct, you know. So it's the same topic, you know, that you've been talking about, but I'm wondering, is noticing that, is that the antidote for it?
You mean noticing?
Noticing that, yeah, that really hard kind of lack of compassion for myself.
What's your experience? I mean, is it helpful to notice?
I think it can be in the moment helpful, but then it fades away and I'll just kind of habitually continue on, you know, in that same manner towards myself.
When it fades, can you reinvigorate it?
Can I reinvigorate the problem? Yeah.
So I think that there's at least one clear thing to understand, and that is that when we recognize something, that's not the problem. Let's start there. Are you saying okay, or
I'm thinking about that.
thinking about it? That's probably the problem.
So the recognizing is not the problem.
Recognizing
get
it
that.
is not the problem. Recognizing it is, at worst case, recognizing it is the beginning of understanding it. And the deeper the understanding goes, the more that we could say that the problem is not there. The understanding is there. But the understanding, often we kind of demand that it have a significant conceptual component. I want to understand it at the level that I understand other things. And that's pretty rare that works. So when we say recognize the issue here, the experience is what we're really recognizing, right? Whether the experience is a sense of success or failure is in a certain way irrelevant. First, the question is, can I recognize it? Can I just see it? And seeing it, can I just put my awareness on it? Like recall the face of somebody that you really care about, or the face of your spiritual mentor, or your mother or father, whatever it is. Can you just see the face and put your awareness on it without any judgment one way or the other, and just be present with it? And if the face is of someone, for example, who generally, when you see them, it inspires a certain kind of strong emotional thing, whether it's positive or negative, I think is not relevant. And then you just put your awareness on that until it vanishes, and little by little see like what's happening there. So I have the recognition. I see it's my mother's face, it's my friend's face, it's my spiritual mentor's face, whatever it is. And I have some kind of internal experience when I see the face. And the question really isn't whether I see the face clearly or whether the face feels like it's dangerous, or I just have a bad feeling or a good feeling. It's really about, what do I do with that experience now that it's in front of me? Can I just have the experience? It's like when we're talking about compassion for ourselves. Can I just have that experience? Can I look at myself in my own mind's eye and just at a time when I feel like what I need is some kindness, and so I generate it for myself, and then I look and I see the kindness. Can I just have it and not do something with it to make it less or more or anything? Just have it. Your kindness is as good as anybody's, so there's no need to judge it as less or more or anything. It's just what it is. But I think generally speaking, we could say there is no one, no sentient being who does not deserve kindness and compassion. No such thing, no matter what they've done. They deserve to be out of that trap. And we deserve it also, because if they're not out of it, we're not out of it. Which is part of how we get the Bodhisattva vow, to focus in as many ways as possible on the benefit of others. Because when they're not out of it, we also are not out of it. We continually victimize ourselves. Does it make sense?
Does it also work the other way? If we're not out of it, they're not out of it?
I think, yeah, to some degree at least. You know, it's a way of speaking. It's not a mathematical truism of some kind, but it's a way of speaking. People, in the broader sense, I think most of us could agree that when I see someone who routinely hurts others, even with intention to hurt them, and that they're happy about hurting them, the more that those things are true, the more I see their pain. That is not a cause of happiness. So generally speaking, what do? We judge them. We hold them in judgment. Maybe even worst case, we wish worse things on them than they visited on others. So we just basically fall into that trap even further and further. So the whole point of the Bodhisattva vow is to give rise to a sense of universality. Like, my pain is everybody's pain, and vice versa. I deserve to be free of it, not just because I deserve to be free of it, but they deserve to be free of it. And furthermore, to the degree to which I and they are not free of it, we all suffer from it. This is just the extension of the classic statement that all things, without exception, are interdependent. All experiences arise interdependently, continuously, all the time. So obviously, kindness and compassion and misery and happiness are not going to be the exception. They're the classic rule. We can test it. So I think that's also worthy. Great teachers always say about in the Dharma, great teachers always say, you need to test this. Try it, see what happens there. And if it doesn't work, then investigate to see whether or not we're doing it correctly, or there's something could be modified a little bit. And if it just never works, then it's time to throw it out.
Thank you.
If you test that a little bit, Judith, and then later we could pursue it some more.
I'm wondering if you have any advice on kind of gauging readiness to take the Bodhisattva vow, or any contemplations to prepare for that if we were to want to pursue it.
There's There's a lot of things that one can do to prepare for it. There are also fairly extensive rituals that one can use to prepare to take the vow. And yet it's clear that virtually no ritual is actually required, notwithstanding that some teachers who would give the vow would require it. And it is probably helpful for some people. There is a teaching, so if we were to prepare, we might do something like, if you're a runner and you need to enter a long run, maybe a marathon or something, what you might do is you might go into the mountains and run in the mountains, right? And so that when you got used to running in the mountains, you come down to sea level where the marathon is, and you will be more prepared. So this analogy will not work for the Bodhisattva vow, since it is not a race. but it has some parallels here. So the preparation for the vow could be in putting some time into what we call the four immeasurables. So the four immeasurables provide us with an opportunity to kind of practice an heroic concern for others. And the four immeasurables then present themselves as immeasurable because of immeasurable sentient beings. So we always say it's utterly impossible to count sentient beings. But so when we engage in the four immeasurables, which are kindness and loving kindness and compassion for them, and a sense that we would like to free them of the causes of suffering and liberate them through giving them the means to free themselves from some of the causes of suffering. And the big thing is that we make these wishes for all sentient beings, not just for some, not just for our friends, but for all sentient beings. And the base of that teaching and practice is the practice of equanimity, just in case we don't get it. Equanimity is really the essence of working with all beings and wishing mentally, working with all of them and wishing for all of them without exception that they might be free of the causes of suffering and experience the causes of happiness. And by so doing, become skillful at benefiting others in the same way. So sometimes we mistake this with the immeasurable compassion, meaning that the compassion is immeasurable, but it doesn't really refer to that, though there's nothing wrong with that. But it refers to immeasurable sentient beings who suffer fundamentally at their own hands. So engaging in those four immeasurables, which there are many texts that explain them. There's a wonderful one by Alan Wallace, but I don't remember the title. What is it? Boundless Heart. Boundless Heart's a good one. Yeah. So you can look in those in texts and see about the four immeasurables, and work with them. Try, experiment with them. Like, what would it feel like if I actually felt unbounded compassion for even just one being? What if there was one person? And you could start with someone that you really cared a lot about. And then, just because you know where this whole thing's going, you might then think of someone that you really don't care about, someone that you really have a bad attitude about, someone who you maybe inadvertently or intentionally wished that they would be harmed. And so then you go to that person, call them up, think of them in front of you, and engage in the practice of loving kindness and compassion. So that would be a method for preparing for the Bodhisattva vow, one of many different ones. We will not do an extremely elaborate Bodhisattva vow. So I think anyone who wants to come to it is welcome to come.
I was laughing because I remembered before I took the Bodhisattva vow with Jaman Khantrul Rinpoche III a long time ago. We were at a camp in the mountains, the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was very isolated. And I'd ask him to give me the vow. And the word spread, and then everybody wanted to take the vow. But then there were a group of us, a group of women, who stayed up pretty much all night in the bathroom in the camp, worrying about, okay, if we told the telephone company, this is the one I remember so well, if we told the telephone company that the check was in the mail, were we breaking the vow? I mean, we went through the most interesting and crazy real world situations. And we were taking 136 vows, which also included do not destroy villages with black magic. Yeah. And so we were wondering if that meant...
I got that one down.
So we were trying to translate that, that we have to suddenly become peace activists against nuclear bombs. What's the real significance of this? Well, someone told Jamin Khantrul Rinpoche what we were doing. That we were up in the bathroom, and we were smoking beady cigarettes. That was so I think that we were kind of high on that, Anyway, he found out about it, and he had us come outside.
He what?
He had us come outside.
Oh, I see.
And he had us go into the meditation hall. And that's all he did. And then he gave the vow to 136 people. And in some way, that gentleness made us realize that we really needed to come out of the bathroom and stop thinking about, some pretty crazy stuff. And I remember one of the things that he said during that time is a vow, and I'm transliterating this into something that Reb Anderson, who's a priest at Zen Center in San Francisco, said, but it made sense to me. It's like, a vow means that you're going to drive the car and a lot of adjustments are going to be made to the wheel as you go down the road. And it doesn't mean that instantly you're going to become this great person. So don't feel guilty if you have to, adjust the wheel. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you because it's just, inside it's just cracking me up, all of us stay. And the bathroom was really tiny too. We were, but so anyway, I hope that
Thanks,
helps,
Susan.
of some
Thank
help.
Part of my question was kind of directed at the conversation we've been having earlier today. Does the aspiration itself, whether you meet that aspiration with to the fullest fidelity possible or not, does the benefit of the vow itself, is it worth it to take it, even if you only meet a fraction of that scope, And I guess knowing only a little bit about what some vows carry, a commitment that it's kind of a big deal to break, so where it falls on the scale of that. And I guess you kind of answered my question already, but that was where my mind was at. So,
were you scared? Were you scared?
Was I scared?
Yeah.
Or am I scared?
Yeah.
No, I guess I would be a little bit, where I'm at now with it is a little bit hesitant and feeling like I need a little bit more preparation. So I feel like that's kind of where I'm still at even after this conversation. So.
We have a meeting in the bathroom.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
I'll see how I feel after that.
Scare you.
That's where all great decisions are made.
Yeah. Insights. Michael, what would you say to somebody, in this case myself, but probably others too, if just before, the days before going to the Bodhisattva vow, that you were feeling really angry and it was going on and it wasn't going away, and no matter what practice you did, it wasn't going away. It occupied your total being. Would you tell that person to go to the Bodhisattva vow or not?
Riddles. I'm kind of pondering the various responses that I've heard from everyone from Kala Rinpoche when he was, people had gone to him when he was going to give a bodhisattva vow and asked this same kind of question. The responses have been really varied, and I think that it's really not. It's really not easy to say in the absence of an actual person saying that I'm concerned about this and that and all. It's like I can easily imagine suggesting, maybe you shouldn't take the vow. Oh yeah, sure. Well, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't take the vow since you're not somebody else. I was thinking more like I can easily imagine a situation where you would suggest that somebody wasn't, really ready to take a vow. And it could be, for example, that they had harmed people and they enjoyed harming people and intended to harm more people and so on. You could easily paint a picture of somebody who probably exists, because I always think, like, if you can imagine somebody, they're out there somewhere. And so certain circumstances could lead you to say, I don't think that's a good idea to take it, especially with the attitude of it doesn't matter, since you're about to take this vow, which many great teachers have said is really of extraordinary significance in one's path. And so you want to actually feel a sense of appreciation for getting the vow and think of its preciousness and work with it from that perspective. And so if somebody came and said, I don't know that I can keep all the vows, but I really want to take it because I look at you and you seem to have it, and so it makes me happy to see it. I think it'll make me happy to have it. That I would find that difficult to say, don't take the vow. And there's always this thing that we have that is really, in a certain way, peculiar to our culture, which is that we set standards for ourselves that are often impossible to reach, and then we flagellate ourselves for not having reached it, not even looking to realize that, hey, you're the one who set it up. No one made that for you. You didn't find it in a book. You just made it, and then. I don't know what you mean by who's the you that made up the something. Well, in other words, the criteria, the standard of being a good bodhisattva is. I mean, you can find texts that also describe all of that in precise terms. Personally, I think that those things in their great precision are more often, I wouldn't say always, but more often not helpful in that form. Just because, especially if the individual who's taking the vow has a proclivity to set a high standard. Well, they're setting a high standard for something they haven't done before, and they don't realize just exactly how difficult it is to maintain that vow. In fact, I think that I've even heard some great teachers say it's impossible. You cannot succeed 100%. So that should be a kind of, not a warning against doing it, but a warning against thinking that if you don't succeed, there's something wrong with you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
For me, I know that the anger in my life is just one of those things that comes up, I work with it, and it dissolves. But that does not mean that I get it in the instant. Sometimes I have to work a couple of days or a couple of weeks on the anger, religiously every single day, focusing on that anger, trying not to blame myself, trying to blame the other person, trying to accept the blame, all of it. And that is one of my habitual tendencies, not a good one particularly, but that's the way it is. So maybe I'm just, maybe I should just take it.
Maybe you should just what?
Take the vow. Because I know all the
Well,
anger
you've
will
already
melt.
taken the vow. It's too late for you.
Oh, I see.
It's too late
You missed
for you.
Well, I was going to renew the vow.
Yeah. Well, see, there's the great antidote that's built into the vow, which is what's called renewing the vow.
That's what I was going to do.
Well, do it. You renew the vow, you do your best, you recognize the shortcomings when they occur. You need to also recognize the good things. It's another little thing we kind of have in our culture, like, if I don't get it perfect, I'm bad. There's something not right. Yeah.
So a piece of this is that we tend to ask a lot of these questions kind of in a hypothetical and abstract way.
Right?
Yeah, and I noticed that, and there's a little bit of this, well, if this, then maybe that, as though there is something other than our circumstance and our motivation and our karmic unfolding that's really on the table. That's all there really is. And so it's not like there's something out there that's looming and is going to smack us.
No.
We
be the
do,
smackers.
yeah, we do that job ourselves. So,
And the smacky.
so I in this, I would just encourage everybody to just kind of be simple about it.
Yeah.
Kind of be simple, really meet yourself, kind of have a bit of kindness about it. It's not set up to be this harsh thing.
There you are. Let's dedicate the merit. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you. That was a very nice discussion.